Not too many people in Hawaii can say they've been a legislator, a lieutenant governor, a governor, and a best-selling author. But I have the one person in the entire state that can definitely say that's true. Governor Cayetano, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, Leah.
So there's been so much has happened since the election for mayor, and you're in 2 different lawsuits, and you have a very good perspective on Hawaii in terms of the government and elections coming up, and also what's going on with the legislature and the community. So just wanted to take some time to check in with you and see see how you're doing. Maybe you can tell us what you've been doing since the election, and maybe fill us in on some of your lawsuits.
Not much. I haven't been doing much. I've been doing personal stuff. You know, I like to read and just kind of taking it easy because that was a tough election. As far as the lawsuits, our rail lawsuit, the appeal has been filed, and the final decision will be made in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. After that, if we win, I think rail will stop. If we lose, then that's it.
So basically, just for people that maybe haven't been following it that closely, it's a lawsuit challenging the city's $5.2 billion rail project, and basically saying it's not the best system for Hawaii, right?
Well, basically saying that they didn't follow the law. And the appeal is on Judge Tashima's ruling. While he ruled for us on 3 issues, we think that he was wrong on some other issues. And that's what the appeal is all about. And so the city now is going to have to file their answer. I think we just filed our brief yesterday.
Good. Okay, this is good timing. So what are the main issues that you're challenging, if you can fill us in, challenging the city on in terms of the rail project that is all about the environmental impact statement, right?
It's about the environmental impact statement. Federal law requires the city or the state, whoever wants to build a project with federal money, to follow some strict environmental rules, you know. And the federal environmental law is meant to put the burden on the local government that wants to build, for example, a rail system, on finding the alternative that will damage the environment the least. And they didn't do that. You know, Hanneman said he wanted steel-on-steel elevated rail, and that was it. What they should have done was they should have looked at the other alternatives. And in fact, under Harris, Harris wanted to do bus rapid transit, BRT. And city spent $10 million for that study, and the study concluded that BRT was the most reasonable and affordable alternative, and one that would do the least damage to the environment. Well, when Hanneman got elected, he pretty much rejected that. He can do that personally, but it's a violation of the law, you know, to ignore a $10 million study by the previous administration that said this alternative is better.
Yeah, and so in your lawsuit, you have a whole lot of different groups, environmental groups, and small business groups, and you have libertarians, Democrats, Republicans, so it's a real mixed bag.
It's a mixed bag, and it's really has been a great experience because usually I'm an advocate on the other side. You know, I'm on the one side, and Republicans are on the other side. And the election being a bipartisan election, but also this lawsuit is really nonpartisan because, as you pointed out, we have libertarians, we have liberals, we have Democrats, and we have Republicans. You know, it's a mixed bag, and the people we have involved with us in the lawsuits, many of them would not even be on the same page with the other plaintiffs if it was a different issue. But on this issue, they all agreed.
And so the environmental groups too, the Outdoor Circle recently joined, well, not recently, but within, a few months, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have the Hawaii's Thousand Friends.
Right.
So a lot of people in the community are represented by those groups, and they really don't want the rail.
Yeah, you know, because it's going to run right down the waterfront, and it's going to do a great deal of damage to not only the environment and burial sites and all of that, but to the view. And to me, it's crazy, you know. A friend of mine who is from New York told me that New York took everything down as much as they could. The rail system that they had that were elevated, They tore it down and put it underground. And that's what we should be doing.
Definitely, because we don't want to be seeing this big metal
Yeah.
steel. And if anybody's been to Chicago and looks under that, is it the L?
Yeah.
With all the rust, and I have pictures of that, and it's loud and it's falling apart.
And it's going to be very costly, and the question is whether, you know, it's worth the money. I don't think it is, but, you know, we'll see.
So there's also another lawsuit on the state level that I know you're not involved with, but it's the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, and it was Paulette Kalekini who was challenging the burials and the EV in town, and so she's actually slowed down the rail for quite a bit of time.
Right.
Probably at least till next September, right?
I'm not sure, but they've completed the the archaeological study, and now they have to write a report. This is the city, and that report has to be submitted to the state historical foundation for approval. That's a long process.
Right. So, well, you know, by then maybe you'll have your hearing.
You know, the city will probably have about 30 days to file their response to our appellate brief. And I think that the Court of Appeals will probably rule within 6 months. If the Court of Appeal rules in our favor, then I think that the project is pretty much over, because you're going to have to go back to step one and start all over.
Now, a big part of pushing not only for the rail, but pushing back against you was Senator Inouye. And now that he's passed on, how much momentum does the rail really have?
Senator Inouye was a big part of it. You know, in my opinion, I studied rail for many, many years. This project would not be funded were it not for Senator Inouye, because it is not a well-planned project. Okay, but he's gone now, and the money actually has been approved by the FTA. The biggest threat, I think, that the city and the state face is if the sequestration goes through. Then you're going to have massive layoffs and, you know, furloughs and things like that. It's going to affect the economy. It's going to affect thousands of people who live here and throughout the country.
That's true. And even for transportation funding, I'm sure, will be impacted.
Yeah, but you know, it was you know, he was careful enough to not include this rail project in the sequestration pot. But the problem is that process, if it goes through, and I'm talking about sequestering, will affect many, many other federal programs that benefit the state. And they're already talking about furloughs and layoffs in I think in Schofield. Yeah.
Now, I know you've given talks on this before, and you know Senator Inouye very well, when you've been the governor and lieutenant governor, and he's been in the Senate. What do you think now in terms of the impact on Hawaii with his passing, and we have a new delegation that's almost brand new?
Well, you know, Senator Inouye was really one of a kind. We don't have anybody who won the Medal of Honor, lost an army in a war, truly a war hero, who chaired the Iran Gate, you know, hearings,
Contras, yeah.
And also was on the Watergate Commission. Senator Inouye developed and built an incredible reputation, you know, in the Congress. We don't have that right now. And in the past, I think that Senator Inouye's basic philosophy was he would leave the decision on the merits of any project to the local government. And if the local government decided, okay, say the university wanted a ship for the ocean marine research, then he would get it, you know, without looking too much into it. That's the way he did it, and he was very, very successful. I'm not very optimistic about us getting that kind of money again, because I think Hawaii might have been #1 in terms of the amount of federal money we got back for every dollar we paid in federal taxes.
Right. He was amazing. Well, he was appropriations chair too.
Yeah, and that
helps.
made a big difference. Yeah.
And I'm sure that he also gave a lot of money as well to other states. I know he did that.
You know, what's interesting, a lot of people don't know that Senator Inouye basically saved H3, you know. The people who were opposed to H3 challenged it in the courts and won at every level. And H3 would have been dead. But what the senator did was he introduced a bill that exempted H3 from the federal environmental laws. Well, there's nobody now to do that kind of thing for the rail project.
Right, now that would get a lot more attention than it did back then too.
Right, and you know, and I think the senator said publicly that he would never do it again. Yeah.
Right. So in terms of the new delegation, we have Brian Schatz, who was appointed. We have Mazie Hirono, who won in the Senate, and then Colleen Hanabusa, who's staying in as a U.S. representative, as a congresswoman, and then a new person, Tulsi Gabbard, who's in there. So you have a real kind of a youngish group compared to what we had before.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think about? Will you be willing to give a little overview of how you think they're doing? And
well, you know, I've worked with Mazie. She was, you know, lieutenant governor in my administration, and I know a little bit about Brian Schatz. I don't think they have a lot on their record right now. Okay. Colleen Hanabusa, I think, has shown she's a leader. Very interesting. Many people don't know that when the rest of the Democrats were, you know, marching to the drum of the labor unions, Colleen voted against two big bills that they wanted. One was the establishment of the ETF. That's a major reform. And the other one, she was opposed to reinstating the mandatory arbitration, which the Democrats did. See, I convinced the Democrats to repeal mandatory arbitration because it was really, the state was always the loser in that. When Governor Lingo became governor, the Democrats reinstated it.
I remember that. Yeah.
Just because she was a Republican. Mm-hmm. And Hanabusa was the only Democrat who voted against it. Mm-hmm. And I give her a lot of credit for that.
I give you both credits for doing that. It was important for Hawaii because maybe you can give a little explanation because we are going through all these negotiations right now, arbitrations with all the different unions. Governor Abercrombie has that.
Well, you know, I told Governor Abercrombie, and Neil is one of my close friends. Right. You know, he wrote the foreword to my book. Mm-hmm. And so when he was elected governor, I told him, your biggest problem is going to be the public unions, you know, and there's no legislator that I know who was more supportive of the unions than Neil Abercrombie. And now they've kind of turned against him because he hasn't given them everything that they want. What's happened with the unions is that unlike the days when say Russell Okada was heading the HGA and Gary Rodriguez was heading the UPW and HSTA was headed by some veterans. This new group of leaders, labor leaders, don't look down the road. They have, you know, and if they do, they ignore the fiscal cliff that's going to be facing us. Huge costs, mostly related to pay raises and benefits. And no one, I think, wants to take away the benefits of the current employees. In fact, you can't do that because the Constitution forbids that. But the legislature and the union leaders should recognize that for new employees, something has to be done. Benefits have to be reduced, you know, and the government just has to be made more efficient. Yeah. And I don't see that. I don't see that among any of the labor leaders.
That and also the political will has to come from the legislature and the governor, and I don't know how much political will there is. The governor did, as you know, because you were there, bring that up during his State of the State address. He talked about the unfunded liabilities and how it has to be paid down and how they need to put in $500 million a year, but they're going to start with $100 million. But even some lawmakers don't even want to do that.
Well, that's the problem. And, you know, I think it was Jim Dater, professor at the university, wrote an article once, and he coined a phrase which has kind of remained with me. He said, the future doesn't vote. And so the people in office today, more than ever, I think are basically concerned with their own political future, you know, and they vote accordingly. It's unfortunate. Not everyone is like that, but the ones who have the power in the political, whether it be state or city, are pretty much like that, you know, whether it's the mayor who, you know, will jump every time the union asks him to, you know, or members of the Democratic members of the state legislature.
Now, you've been on both sides of this issue, so I can ask you for your assessment.
Yeah.
You've been supported by the unions when you've run, and then you've been opposed by the unions when you've run, depending on when you ran, and always supported, I think, by the unions, right, except the last race. So how does that impact the election?
Well, it can have a big impact because, you know, together the unions are very powerful.
Yeah.
Not so much in terms of money, but they have huge numbers. And they have a captive audience. They, you know, with their newsletters and things like that. And what they will do is paint whoever they're running against, whether it was Lingle or me or Ana Morgado, as an enemy of labor. That's powerful stuff. And in my last election, they were very upset with me because in my first term, I finally got to realize fully what kind of a burden the unions put on state government.
This is the first term as governor.
My first term as governor. And I said to myself, wow, here I am, I'm cutting welfare benefits, cutting social programs, you know, domestic abuse, alcohol, those kind of things. And the money is going to pay raises. It didn't make sense to me. But we had mandatory arbitration at that time, and you know, you couldn't do anything else. In my second term, I said, I'm not going to let that happen again. So we repealed mandatory arbitration. And so in my second term, the teachers went on strike. They told me, we want a contract that's $240 million a year. Maybe it was $260. And I said, we can't afford that, you know, because if you recall, during my two terms, especially my first term, the recessions or the economic downturn we have today is nothing. Back then, there were record bankruptcies, foreclosures. You know, people were really, really hurting. Those are bad times.
And also because the military left because they were in the Iraq War, right?
Right.
And so we had big holes. I lived on the windward side, and it was empty. A lot of military families were gone.
Not only that, you know, then the Japanese tourists stopped coming because they, you know, as one Japanese politician put it, you know, I guess the Japanese people feel that they shouldn't be coming here to celebrate while young Americans are fighting a war, you know. So Waikiki was like a ghost town.
Yeah.
Well, as a result, we really had to look around for money, and we really had to cut the government. And I did, and the unions reacted.
You know, one of the things I've heard you speak about, it's kind of fun to get on the record and have it on video so people can always remember, but you were talking about how the Senate, when you were in the Senate, how the Republicans and the Democrats formed a coalition so that you could get some good bills passed, and how well you worked together. And I was just wondering if you could share about that.
Well, you know, what happened in the Senate, this is 1981, I think, is the same thing that happened in the House. The House today, the Democrats formed a coalition with 7 Republicans. Well, back in 1981, the Democrats couldn't organize by themselves. And so we formed a coalition with the Republicans. I think there were about 7 or 8 Republican senators back then. And, you know, and the Republicans had some real talent. I mean, Mary George from Windward, great person. Pat Psyche, you know, Wadsworth Yee, Scotty Henderson, Buddy Suarez. These people had a lot to contribute. And when we formed the coalition with them, we actually gave them committees. not the big committees, but we kept Ways and Means and the judiciary and things like that. But we gave them committees because we wanted to use their skills, and what happened was we came up with some pretty good legislation. Unfortunately, on the other side, Henry Peters, who was a Bishop of State trustee at that time, vowed he would not pass any coalition bills. So he was putting this partisanship before the
people.
The people.
Yeah.
And so some of the bills we passed, we had to take that into account. And some got passed, but he killed quite a few bills. Yeah.
So that's neat how it's come full circle again today, but we'll see how it works out. Well, this is a good test.
I think it'll be better this time around because I think the Senate is much more mature, I think,
Yes.
And if the bill is good, I think they'll pass it.
I agree with you. I think the Senate's got some pretty good members, real strong people. Okay, that brings up some hot topics today. I'll throw at you and see what you think. What about the University of Hawaii? You have this big dispute now between some of the senators and the head of the university over money management, and how much should the Senate be involved in it? Because they do have to appoint the Board of Trustees, right? And the Board, am I calling it the Board of Regents? Sorry.
They confirm.
Confirm, right.
The governor appoints and they confirm.
And then they help with allocating the money. But what's your thoughts on the dispute, and how well is the university managed?
I really believe that the university should have as much autonomy as possible. Now, they can't have full autonomy on budget matters, but when it comes to administration policies and all of that, that should be left primarily to the Board of Regents. In this particular case, I think the investigation by the Senate was warranted, but I think the university didn't handle it well. For the life of me, I don't see why public officials need attorneys when they go before the legislature. And they spent I don't know, $75,000 to hire attorneys, and they had PR people.
And you're an attorney.
Yeah.
So you can give a good perspective.
Well, listen, the University of Hawaii and its officials are public officials. Public officials should not need attorneys when they go before another public entity called the state legislature or the state senate, and I didn't think that the university did themselves any favors by doing that. They should have just gone before the Senate and said, if they made a mistake, just say, listen, this is what we did. There were some mishaps here, here and there, and this is what we've done to fix it. Instead, they made it a whole big thing. And the more they had attorneys, who in some cases seem to be stonewalling the Senate, the more determined the Senate was, and so the whole thing got kind of blown out of proportion, I think.
Well, one of the big issues in the newspaper recently, and I think the person that brought it up is a friend of yours, about procurement at the university and how there's problems there. And we've had Board of Regents quit or speak out, but mostly the Board of Regents are pretty compliant with the administration. So just wondering, what are your thoughts on that? Because you've been through a lot of years and years of seeing procurement, overseeing it.
I know both of the principals involved.
Yeah.
So they've supported me in the past. I don't know what the facts are, but I do know this. A guy like Dennis Mitsunaga would not write a letter like that unless he was really, unhappy about what happened.
Right.
Excuse me.
And we've seen him speak out, not very often, but we saw him speak out during your election.
Well, yeah, because he felt he was being smeared too, and interestingly, of all the people who have been fined and even sent to jail, Dennis Mitsunaga is not one of them, and yet he has been investigated like all the others, and yet they keep on, casting aspersions about him. And it's wrong, but if I was him, I would sue some of these guys. But I think he has enough issues with his company. His company is one of 3 companies selected nationally by the federal government to do work on the renovation and in some cases the building down of U.S. bases in South Korea. And to do that kind of work, you need top security clearance because you're talking about bases with Patriot missiles and stuff like that.
Right.
You know? And he's one of three. Those companies have been vetted, and that I think speaks for him and his integrity.
Now, just wanted to bring up with you, before we have only a couple minutes left on the show, but I wanted to ask you about the lawsuit that you filed against the Carpenters Union. You filed it in state court. It was taken, they wanted to move it to federal court. You won to keep it in state court. And what's the status of that lawsuit?
Well, if we go to trial, it'll probably happen right around the election because these lawsuits, and having practiced myself, always take a lot of time. So we've been through one motion, and there are going to be others filed, and we're going to have to deal with each one. And at some point, we'll take depositions, to find out who's behind this and how far it goes up, if it goes.
And it's a defamation lawsuit.
It's
basically.
a defamation lawsuit. Not easy for a public figure to win, but I have two attorneys who I think are the best trial lawyers in town, Michael Green and Jim Bickerton. And Jim, I think, is acknowledged as probably one of the best defamation lawyers in town. Mm-hmm. He's done a lot of defense work in defamation, so he knows the defense side. And when he looked at my case, and he looked at the commercials and what they did, he feels that the standards set by the U.S. Supreme Court, in other words, to sue, for a public figure to sue, you must prove malice. We can prove it. And in one of the commercials, they actually pretty much accused me of committing a crime. It's kind of a helpless feeling, if you just sit there and take it. I wish there was dueling, but that's illegal. And so the lawsuit is the only way I can get some redress in terms of my reputation, and straightening the whole thing out. And I think that whether I win or lose, the big public service will be the people will find out, because we're going to find out who is behind all of this. That's great. And it'll be good for future politicians that want to run for office. Right, because if they've done this to me, I hope I don't sound arrogant, but they do this to a former two-term governor. Mm-hmm. Just imagine what they can do to the younger guys coming up. And the average person that wants to run. Right, right. All right, well, we're going to have you on the show again, Governor. Okay. Thank you so much, and we'll catch up with you again from time to time, and thank you so much for your time. It's always fun to talk to you. Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been Malia Zimmerman with News Behind the News. Aloha.